Hello friends and welcome back. In this video we're going to talk about Dr. Johnson's work Life of Milton. Dr. Johnson was born in Lichfield and then went to London. Poverty also took him to Oxford University to fight a battle against toil, envy, want, the patron and the jail. One remarkable aspect of Johnson's biographical writings is that he juxtaposes a criticism of life and works of his subject with biographical description. The biographies have two distinct parts, namely, biographical information of the poet and the criticism of his works. The first part of Life of Milton is nearly 175 paragraphs. It deals with Milton's life. Like Abraham Cowley, Milton was also a precious genius. At the age of 15, he caught one's eye. He entered university with the intention of taking religious orders but changed his mind because his republican spirit could not have endured any kind of servility. He wrote commerce when he was 26. Lycidas came at 29. He traveled to France and Italy, which provided him with many images which his memory recollected 20 years later when he was writing Paradise Lost. Around 50 years of his age, blindness struck him when he had planned much but produced little. Cromwell's autocratic rule estranged him from his own friends. Milton admired Spenser, Shakespeare, and Cowley. The first named was his favorite poet. His last greatest work was Samson Agonistes. Johnson's Life of Milton can be regarded as one of the best sources of his views on poetry. For Johnson, the function of poetry is to please and instruct. Johnson held that the imagination of the poet must be controlled by reason. He also held truth in higher esteem than beauty. For Johnson, inspiration was important for the process of poetic creation. For him, an epic poet must have moral outlook which must be conveyed in an elevated and dignified manner and which would be appropriate for the expression of lofty ideas and profound sentiments. Johnson thought that the epic was the highest form of poetry and he subscribed to the principles of Aristotle. He criticized Milton for using the English language with a foreign idiom. Dr. Samuel Johnson begins his criticism of Milton's poetry with his criticism of juvenile productions. Milton's early poems were in Italian, Latin, and English. Johnson expresses his inability to remark on the Italian poems because he does not know Italian. He tells us that the Latin pieces are licentiously elegant, but the delight which they afford is rather by the exquisite imitation of the ancient writers, by the purity of the diction and the harmony of the numbers, than by any power of invention of vigor or sentiment. They are not all of equal value. The elegies excel the odes. Dr. Johnson also tells us that the English poems, though they make no promises of paradise lost, have this evidence of genius that they have a cast original and unborrowed. But their peculiarity is not excellence. If they differ from verses of others, they differ from the verse, for they are too often distinguished by repulsive harshness. The combination of words are new, but they are not pleasing. The rhymes and epithets seem to be laboriously sought and violently applied. Speaking about Milton's Lycidas, Johnson denounces it. Johnson criticizes Lycidas as one of the books which the reader admires and lays down and forgets to take up again. Johnson finds nothing original in the first English elegy, for it is an imitation of the classical mode with no change. The sentiments expressed do not suit the intimate relationship, for there was no close relationship at all. So, Johnson thinks that there is no truth in the elegy. With his neoclassical tendencies, Johnson was always against the pastoral form. He says that none would admire or be pleased with the elegy had he not known that Milton wrote it. He felt that the pastoral form of Lycidas was easy, vulgar, and therefore distinguished. The passion of the poem, according to Johnson, was also artificial. He says, "What beauty there we must therefore seek in the sentiments and images. It is not to be considered as the effusion of real passion, for fashion runs not after remote allusions and obscure opinions." Johnson is against the use of blank verse and regards Milton's use of blank verse in Lycidas as a fault of the poem. Speaking about Il Allegro and Second Penseroso, he says there are twin poems representing two aspects of the temperaments of one and the same mind, the gay and the melancholy, standing for El Allegro and Second Penseroso respectively. In this poem, the cheerful man is associated with the lark, the morning, the sound of the cock announcing the dawning of the day, the sound of the horns and the barking of the hunting dogs. He loves to see the rising sun, listen to milkmaid's song, and partakes of every joy that rural scenes offer. Milton has portrayed both, and they share nothing in common except that music delights both of them. While talking about Second Penseroso, he says Second Penseroso represents the Puritan ideas of life. Further, he says there is no mirth in his melancholy, but some melancholy in his mirth. It leads the reader to reflect on the poet's attitude of life. Johnson appreciates the beauty and music of these poems but disapproves of their mode of versification. Johnson praises them as noble efforts of imagination and that imagery is proper and pleasing. Speaking about Comus, Dr. Johnson says this is the masque that Milton wrote on request. Masque of Comus is the best of Milton's juvenile writings. He found the language, power of description, and the vigor of sentiment of Comus remarkable. However, he found it deficient drama. The action of the play for him is unconvincing and unreasonable. The story of the separation of the sister from her brothers and the consequence is not managed well according to Dr. Johnson. While considering Milton's masterpiece Paradise Lost, Dr. Johnson says the expression of the moral in Paradise Lost is attractive and surprising. According to him, an epic should have a great subject, and Milton has chosen the best possible subject. The purpose is to vindicate the ways of God to men, and this is praised because Milton advocates obedience to the will of God. The protagonists are dignified personages, being the highest and noblest of human beings, that is Adam and Eve. The other characters are angels in the heaven and the fallen angels, chief of whom is Saturn, is portrayed in his pristine dignity, splendor, and undaunted spirit. The epic, in 12 books, traces the circumstances leading to the fall, disobedience, and mutual recriminations of Adam and Eve and their final exit. The two fallen characters are portrayed with dignity proper to their status. He praises Paradise Lost and defends Addison's criticism of Saturn. He says, remarks on the Saturn are offensive to a pious ear. Further, he says that the imagery, his descriptions seem to be drawn from his knowledge of books than from real nature. The sentiments suit the character and the diction, the sentiment. Milton meets the requirement of appropriateness, consistency, etc. in every respect. Similes are less numerous but more various when compared to Homer and Virgil. A Puritan by upbringing and practice, the moral element in the epic surpasses all else before him. Paradise Lost, according to Dr. Johnson, comprises neither human action nor human manners. Apart from this, Johnson is also critical about the language and versification of the Paradise Lost. Paradise Regained, according to him, had many elegant passages and was always instructive, but it was deficient in dialogues and action. The poem in long run, according to Dr. Johnson, was dull and tedious and failed to please. Samson Agonistes was, for him, a failure as a drama. It had some beautiful passages and single lines, but its plot was loose, construction faulty, and the characters lacked unity. He praises Paradise Regained and Samson Agonistes for its dramatic work. Towards the end of the life of Milton, Johnson gives a balanced and judicious estimate of Milton as a poet. He says that Milton is not the greatest of epic poets simply because he is not the first. Milton's language is peculiarly his own. It has no resemblance to any earlier writers or the language in common use. However, Milton's language is sometimes highly Latinized. Johnson regards this as a fault and comments that Milton write no language but affected a Babylonish jargon. Johnson praises Milton's skill in handling the blank verse but warns that Milton is a poet to be admired but not imitated. Johnson points out that as a young man Milton was active and vigorous, and his domestic habits were those of a devoted scholar, although he was a disciplinarian. In his daily routines, he was not much of an expert in financial matters and ended his days in near poverty. Johnson had doubts regarding Milton's political beliefs. Johnson writes, "He hated all whom he was required to obey. It is to be suspected that his predominant desire was to destroy rather than to establish, and he felt not so much the love of liberty as repugnance to authority." However, Johnson praises Milton for his strong determination and capability to work in adverse circumstances. Johnson did not attempt to idealize the character of Milton. The minute details of Milton's habits and character make the work more interesting and realistic at the same time. See, Dr. Johnson was a neoclassical writer and John Milton was the Renaissance writer. Therefore, Dr. Johnson seems to criticize Milton and his earlier poems out of the prejudices, and he praises Milton very reluctantly and grudgingly. Johnson's main criticism of Milton's early poetry is that there is nothing original about it, and when Milton tries to be original, his results are not pleasing. Dr. Johnson also accuses Milton of superiority complex and says that he never praised anybody. Of his praise, he was very frugal, according to Dr. Johnson. In the last paragraph, Dr. Johnson gives Milton his due praise, calling him an inventive genius. Milton borrowed very little from the Homer, and his epic is the original work of his fertile mind and imagination. If it is not the greatest epic, it is because it is not the first. Samuel Johnson's Life of English Poets marks an important development in the history of biography. Johnson's Life of Milton can be regarded as one of the sources of his views on poetry. In his Life of Milton, Johnson provides comprehensive account of Milton's life by incorporating every possible detail of his life besides providing important criticism of his greatest works. That's all from Life of the Milton in this video. I think you've liked it. If you liked it, hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new to it. Thank you very much for watching.